My thinking wasn't straight. I got caught up in this medication merry-go-round. And then one day I thought, fuck this. I know a medication that works real fucking well. I basically had a relapse after 24 years. I'm not into the character defect idea. Saying the word defective over and over, it's not helpful. Default is a better word because I default to that setting. I think we overfocus on defect and beat ourselves over the head with this program. Program's all about love, man, and we got to start with ourselves. When you're ready, no matter what happens in the meeting, it'll be fine. If you're not ready, no matter what happens in the meeting, it'll be wrong.
Hello and welcome to 12 Steps and 12 Questions. My name is Silvio and I'm an addict. This pod is full of personal and inspirational stories of recovery from addiction. And in every episode, I'll ask each guest the same 12 questions about their life, addiction and recovery. Quick warning, there will be some graphic descriptions and a healthy amount of swearing. For this episode, please welcome Patrick. Hi listeners, welcome to this new episode of 12 Steps and 12 Questions. Recovery is all about connection and building communities, which is why we now have an Insta and a Facebook page for 12 Steps and 12 Questions, to make it easier for the message of recovery to be found. Please come and join us and spread the word. All links are in the show notes. Now, our guest today is all about building communities. Patrick is one of the founders of the Friendly Circle Berlin, a leading light in the emotional sobriety movement. Patrick, please come in and introduce yourself.
Hi, Silvio. Yes, my name is Patrick. I'm a grateful member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's good to be with you today.
Great stuff. Thank you, Patrick. I know that we have an event coming up soon in May, which is an emotional sobriety event. Would you like to quickly tell us about it? Because I'm really quite excited about being part of it as well.
The Dublin event came about as a follow-up to the event we did in London in 2024 in May. We did a live event in London, which was very successful because the focus of our group became emotional sobriety and other trauma-informed recovery pathways. That's how we stated. And we would bring in psychologists and spiritual teachers and all sorts of people from originally people who came into recovery and then became professionals. So the conference is May 23rd, 24th, and 25th of 2025 at Trinity College, Dublin.
Where can you get tickets?
Well, you can buy tickets on our website, friendlycircleberlin.org.
friendlycircleberlin.org. Brilliant. I will be there. I can't wait. I really enjoyed the conference in London. I absolutely loved it, and I thought it was such a blessing. And I also felt that I learned so much in such a short amount of time, and the concept of stage 2 recovery or emotional sobriety, and just being surrounded by so many people who were clearly so incredibly well. It was just brilliant. So I really look forward to being there in Dublin in May. I look forward to that. Let's get to our 12 questions. The first question that I ask every guest on this podcast, Patrick, is, did you have any adverse childhood experiences?
Okay, so great question to start with, Silvio. And of course, it's so pertinent, to so many of us in the rooms. And for myself, I grew up in a very loving and supportive family. My parents were not big drinkers. My father hardly drank at all. And they were two people who were quite obviously in love with each other, the way they treated each other. We could see that. I'm one of 11 children.
Wow.
I grew up in the wilds of rural Ireland. I was born in 1957, so I grew up, in the 60s in the wilds of rural Ireland. So definitely no adverse childhood experiences within the home. But, you grow up in the wilds of rural Ireland. As soon as you leave the door and go to school, So I guess there was a lot of bullying for sure. I mean, I got beat up a lot because I was a skinny kid who couldn't play sports. And, I was, I know what it feels like to get punched in the face. Tell you that much, I have many memories of that.
For no reason or something in particular? Were you the smallest, the youngest?
Well, boys will be boys. You get a bunch of roughneck, mostly farmers' sons, from rural Ireland together at school. You're going to have a lot of rough and tumble going on. So, and there was definitely quite a bit of bullying that I experienced.
How long did that go on for?
Well, I can just remember it always being the case,
Right.
But basically, I left school when I was 15 because I just didn't want to take any of this shit anymore.
Okay, so it really heavily influenced really the rest of your life, I suppose, what with if you left school quite early.
I would say so. I mean, I couldn't wait to get away from school. I couldn't wait, actually, to get away from Ireland at that point.
Right. What had Ireland done to you? Did you associate the bullying with Ireland?
Well, no. I mean, what really happened when I was 15, we had moved from rural Ireland. We had moved to Dublin. And just the part of Dublin that we had moved it to, I was almost afraid to walk out the door, I guess at that point, I went to the local school to look around, and I thought, there's no way I'm going to this school.
Right.
And I made an agreement with my parents that what I could do is start working at the age of 15 rather than going to school. So I took a factory job as an apprentice in a factory.
In Dublin?
In Dublin, yeah.
This would have been, what, like 1972, 3, 4, something like that?
1972.
What's that like? Ireland, just for a second, take us back to Ireland, 1972. You're 15 years old and you start working in a factory. I mean, that must have, nowadays, I can just imagine the sepia filter on this,
Well, it was funny because I walked around that area where the factory was it was on Merchants Quay in Dublin. And that area back then was so different. I mean, I walked around that area around it in a place called Stony Batter, and it's got these fancy little designer coffee shops, and
it's all gentrified now.
Yeah, well, it's totally changed. If there's anybody from Dublin listening, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But yeah, so it's night and day. I mean, it's
yeah. And what was your experience like, though? I mean, let's also just for a second just circle back ever so slightly. I mean, you said you're one of 11 children.
Yeah.
So, which end of the spectrum were you at? Were you amongst the youngest or the oldest? I mean, how did you grow up with so many people at the same time?
Well, I was the fourth eldest.
Okay.
Yeah, I have two older sisters and an older brother, and I was the fourth in line, and then the house started filling up.
Did you feel jealous of all the others? I mean, how does it work? I mean, it's a very large dinner table, I'd imagine.
Well, yeah. I guess one of the things I liked was the fact that we had this small farm in rural Ireland, so I could be out, even though my father wasn't a farmer. He was actually the local school teacher, but it wasn't a working farm. But at least I could go out and do chores and get out of the house. And I spent a lot of time, doing that. And but the family,
was it very loud?
Not overly so, I would say, because my dad, he was pretty quiet sort of guy, and he was the local school teacher in the primary sort of national school, so he'd always have stuff to do in the evenings, correcting students' homework and all that, and he was very into us sitting around and doing our homework to make sure that we did it, and so there was that aspect, and then we had a lot of family rituals. Like, for instance, we were very Catholic. We all said the rosary together every night. Yeah. And that was something. And our grandmother lived with us, and she was very Catholic, and so were my parents. But so yeah, there was a sort of a ritualistic aspect of growing up in that household that
You get bullied quite a bit, and you move away from the rural place. There's a big change happening, therefore, in your early life. You know, you move into Dublin, and you know that's a massive change. I still find it almost a bit impossible to imagine to sit. You know, so I grew up in a 4-people household: my mum, my dad, my sister, me. You know, we're Italian, so we were very loud. You know, there's always something happening, always someone yelling. You know, some doors banging. It was, you know, we're just 4 people. I can't even imagine what it's like with like 11 kids and two parents. But still, you know. But you know, there's a big change happening around this time for you, and you're starting to work in a factory because you didn't want to go back to school because you were being bullied. Now, our question 2 is, what did the moment you first got hooked or the fun times look like? My guess is, you can tell me if I'm getting this terribly wrong, that at some point around this time you started discovering alcohol and or drugs.
Oh yes. So I really, it was right about the age of 13. At school, when we first started, you know, a bunch of us boys would get together and we'd chip in some money and we'd buy flagon bottles of cider, you know, but it was alcoholic cider. And I loved the taste, you know. Okay, so it says in the big book, alcoholics, we drink because we like the effect produced by alcohol, basically. And I mean, no shit, Sherlock. I mean, that's that was, I like the effect. Right.
Right away.
Yes, definitely. And it all of a sudden, you know, where I'm getting beat up by all these kids, I can drink with them and somehow fit in, you know. And but I was thinking about that question, you know, when the first time when the party started. Well, that was when I was 16 years old. I left Ireland, and I got a job, a living-in job that was advertised in the Shamrock Employment Agency on O'Connell Street, Dublin. She had these ads for living-in jobs in the UK, hotels, pubs, all that sort of thing. So I went in to see her, and she got me a job living in a pub in Essex.
Wow.
So she said, you can go when you're 16. I was 15 when I went in to see her, but you'll need a note from your parents. And it was an apprenticeship, apparently. So anyway, as soon as I turned 16, like a couple of weeks later, I left home for this job in a pub in Buckhurst Hill in Essex, pub called the Bold-Faced Stag. It's still there.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So anybody
not much changes in Buckhurst Hill, apparently.
No, but it's at that time there was a really fancy restaurant in it. You know, it was, you know, one of those old pubs where it was a big building, and they had a restaurant, and then the big pub, and then a sort of a lounge bar, and which was the cocktail bar for the restaurant. And they had all these rooms upstairs, and I got a room sharing with another couple of fellas, and who were working there in the kitchen. Mm-hmm. And so I was an apprentice in the restaurant. And I would say when the party started was the first day I arrived there, because it was a Saturday and I was working in the restaurant. And on Saturday night, the owner used to sit around with us, all the staff, and we'd all have a big dinner and play poker. And it was my first night there, and my job was to get everybody drinks, including myself, and you could drink whatever you wanted. And
so for a dream job for a budding alcoholic. Yes.
Oh my God, I was off to the races, man. You know.
What did that look like? Were you a blackout drinker right away, or were you still sort of? Did you have some breaks? So some a little bit of the brake pad left there at that point.
Oh, well, I'll tell you what happened. That first, I mean, I was going around getting everybody drinks, and everybody was sitting at this big round table, probably about 12 or 15 staff, and they're all playing poker. And then my job's to help this other guy bring everybody drinks and replace their drinks. And every time I go to the bar to mix drinks, and the barman was showing me how to mix drinks, and I'd have one for myself, and I was drinking wine, and I was drinking beer, and I was drinking Bacardi and Cokes,
Oh, God.
and I got shit-faced drunk.
Yeah.
And then the following morning, I didn't wake up to come down from my shift, and the owner came in, and he dragged me out of bed, and then he said, "You're late." And then I come down, and he handed me this little shot glass that had this brown looking liquid in it. And he said, "Take that, old chap," you know. And, and so he said, "Down the hatch." And I drank it, and I went running to the toilet, and I mean, heaved right away. And it turns out it was Verna Branca. And he said, "That'll set you straight, old chap."
Some sort of bitter, isn't it?
Yeah. But it's like the cure for the hangover, apparently, you know. I mean, you know, it's like that one shot Underberg.
Yeah. In Germany. Yeah, I hear that.
Yeah. So anyway,
So you were introduced to the hair of the dog right away.
I was introduced, exactly, the hair of the dog. There you go. And but as far as drinking was concerned, I mean, it just was a daily ritual right away, because I was in that industry. I mean, I remember we'd come down in the morning, we'd set up the dining room, and then we'd go off to get changed to come down from lunch. But before you go off to get changed, you could have your first shift drink of the day,
Well,
like at 10 in the morning, you know.
yeah.
And you could have a drink, and you go into the bar, you could have a drink. When you finish the lunch shift, you could have your second shift, and these were allowed, you know.
It always astounds me how alcoholics and addicts seem to find either jobs that help them at least hide their alcoholism and their addiction, or alternatively are actively supportive in that regard. I always think that that's really fascinating how that works out. So you had a job that essentially almost required you to drink.
I would say so, yes, exactly.
Yeah. And how did it progress from there? That didn't necessarily mean that you had to become an alcoholic, but it sounds like you were a budding alcoholic, as I said earlier. So I mean, it was the groundwork was done almost.
Yeah, I mean, I became a daily drinker.
Right.
That was the beginning of my drinking career. But I was able to hold it together somehow. I was always a hard worker. I mean, I was very motivated as a teenager. I'd started reading self-help books and stuff like that. And I was really, really a motivated kid when I think about it. You know, I mean, I was reading all kinds of motivational books.
Sure.
So I had this plan for my life, you know, in my early teens. I mean, when I went there to London, I mean, I didn't have a pot to piss in. I came from a family that, you know, we were just barely surviving, but we managed to. And so I had started reading these motivational books when I was 15. I think that's what propelled me to leave Ireland, actually. And so, I mean, I was a daily drinker, but I was still able to show up for work, and I worked real hard, and I really, you know, was very determined at that age. I mean, to the point that after arriving there penniless at 16, I bought my own home in London when I was 18.
Wow.
I bought a flat on Queensway in Bayswater. I was very motivated, you know.
Impressive.
I mean, obsessive compulsive meant I was good at my job. And, you know, so I would get promotions and all of that. But I was definitely a daily drinker. But I didn't think it was a problem. I mean, everybody around me was a daily drinker. The only people I associated with were drinkers. So I didn't see it as a problem at this stage. No.
Sure. You obviously didn't think that there might be something at work here, that it is doing something for you that you can't do for yourself, type thing.
No. The promises in the big book, right? So I love Joe and Charlie, and I used to listen to them all the time. And when they read the promises, they preface each one of them with when I take a drink.
Right.
Like when I take a drink, fear of people and of economic insecurity leaves me.
Yes.
When I take a drink, I intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was my life. It's almost like the more I drank, the more motivated I got or something. They call it, they call it in England? Dutch courage or something, I need a few drinks, then I can do anything. So it was that kind of drinking.
I mean, it's difficult to detect early on anyway. One, you could just be a hard drinker.
Yes.
Two, you are in a space and time framework, a context that would allow for this sort of drinking, and nobody would raise an eyebrow.
Yeah.
Why? There's nothing wrong here. Nothing to see here. Just keep on moving.
Exactly. I know lots of guys like that, especially in the industry I was in. There's a guy, I've known him for years, and he's a big time drinker. He's been very successful in business. He can go out to restaurants and drink a $500 bottle of wine. And I was talking to him one time about it, and he said, well, you're an alcoholic. I'm just a heavy drinker, And I could stop if I had saying, well, do you think you could stop? He said, every January, but, whatever. That he's quite happily, that's the way he does it,
It's difficult, I mean, in brackets here, I suppose, but it's difficult, one, to judge other people's experiences, and their level of alcoholism, right? Yeah. But I have met people like that, and at some point, not anymore, but in earlier recovery, certainly, as in the first few months or so, I was really just jealous of them, that they'd be able to just hold it together somehow and seem to be having all the fun as well, whereas I sort of, managed to run myself into the ground.
Yeah, well, I held it together for a lot of years before I ran it into the ground. Well, a lot of years. I mean, not really. 16, I started really heavy like that. And then in my mid-20s, it started to become a serious problem.
Which dovetails nicely with our question 3, which is, what were your worst consequences? And finally, your rock bottom. Now, obviously, there might be quite a large time frame here that we're talking about, but still, you said it became a problem in your mid-20s. How did that manifest, and then how did that progress to you coming into the rooms?
I would say one of the things that helped move it along quickly was my heavy usage of speed and then cocaine.
Right.
And finally crack cocaine.
How did that come about? You didn't wake up one morning with a pipe in your hand.
No, I didn't. It came about through, well, first of all, like I said, I think I've always been a workaholic. So I was working very, very long hours. I had ended up in the nightclub business in the West End of London, and in Soho. And so in that environment, I started using speed, probably my late teens, and it was cheap, and it was easily accessible, and I seemed to be able to work around the clock and drink as much as I wanted and not get drunk.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
And then bit by bit, there was a lot of cocaine going around in the early 80s, in the clubs especially. And I first got into cocaine just through, to me, I just thought, well, it's so friggin' expensive and speed's so cheap. Why would I spend all my money on this stuff until I got a taste of it, Then that was it, I was off to the races. And, so I started with cocaine, probably 1982, 83, sometime around there. And I would say that my everything accelerated. You know what I mean? Everything accelerated. And I'd had my own business in my early 20s. I'd, started my own business and was quite successful, still owned my own home and all of that. And but it was around about 1985. That's when it just got out of control. And I decided, London's really the problem. I need to get away from here and get away from drugs, So I sold my flat that I had at the time in Soho. And I thought I need to get away from drugs. So I moved to New York.
And yeah, because there's no drugs in New York, of course, famously.
That's right. Geographic, and classic stuff. And so then from 85 to 88, it got worse and worse,
This reminds me a little bit, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but this reminds me a little bit of Bill Wilson. I mean, what he's like, a self-made guy, and he does quite well for himself, and he drinks really quite heavily from early on, and then things go haywire, and then he goes up to Montreal and all the rest of it, and you kind of a self-made guy here, you're really young, you buy your own flat, it's no mean feat in London, and you have your own business and so on, so there's some similarities here, which I'm sure you've noticed.
Well, I didn't have the motorcycle. Yeah. I love the story of him going off on his motorcycle with Lois and all that. Yeah. But yeah, so anyway, long story short, I end up it was 1988. I'm living in a sleeping bag on Skid Row in LA, down on South Main Street in a little park opposite the Amtrak station. That's what my life had sort of become, very small.
Yeah. I'd love, we just sort of touched on the end points there, the little bit in the middle, what happened when you went to New York? You didn't lose everything right away, did you?
Oh.
How did the progression manifest, and how did you lose bit by bit?
I arrived in New York in midwinter, and I decided, I was sitting in a bar in Manhattan, and I'm looking at an advertisement for Hawaii. And I thought, shit, this winter's getting to me. That looks great. And the following day, I got a ticket to Honolulu. And I got a job in the Hilton Hotel in Waikiki. And, over there in Hawaii, I mean, the drinking life, man, and the locals, getting together with some of those locals, drinking sessions. And drugs and everything else. I mean, I fell into that sort of culture over there. And
right, okay. So you didn't really stay in New York for all that long?
No. And then I worked. I was probably 6 months out in Hawaii, and working. And my drinking got out of control though, over there, and drug use.
How did that manifest? I mean, in dirty detail, really. When you say it got out of control, what, you went on really long benders, or was it more of a case of you having a drink right away first thing in the morning?
Oh, I had started morning drinks long before that. The 6 a.m. bars. Yeah, I love the morning bars. and I was a bar drinker, really. So I would say it switched more from being a bar drinker to being a lone drinker, just drinking anytime. I just needed to have alcohol in my system, because I would start getting DTs if I didn't,
Yeah. So you're shaking.
Yeah, a lot of that. So there was definitely a progression, a physical progression.
Can you remember the first time you were shaking and thinking to yourself, this isn't great, is it?
Well, it got real bad in Hawaii, and I thought it was the heat was getting to me.
Right. Oh, delusion. Right. Okay. It's just the heat.
It's too damn hot here,
Yeah. At the moment I drink, I cool down. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I mean, I remember waking up drunk, passing out on the beach. I wake up with 3rd-degree burns, you know what I mean? So I was getting out of control. Yeah.
And at some point, though, you realised it's not the heat and nothing else. It's really
It's really Hawaii, and I need to go somewhere else. And so the next stop was New Orleans. And then the next stop after that was Miami. And then the next stop after that was Los Angeles.
You're like a rock and roll band.
Yeah, right. That was my tour. So, and then when I get to Los Angeles, now it's really out of control. And then, of course, I go down on Skid Row to look for a hotel because they were really cheap. You can rent them by the night on South Main Street. And then I would go look for these jobs that they pay cash daily. You know, I was not able to hold down a restaurant job anymore. And I was really good in that industry, but I just couldn't hold down the job. And so...
How were you lying to yourself at this time? How were you lying to yourself to say, "Oh, I can turn this around"? Or how do you know what I mean? When in that space, often we tell ourselves, not always, but mostly we tell ourselves lies, don't we? "Oh, I can turn this around tomorrow if I wanted to. I'm just going through a bad patch. I've been really unlucky." I don't know. How were you lying to yourself?
Well, I would constantly think if the circumstances were different, if I was in a different city. But that lie or that delusion started to wear thin, you know, because I remember what happened. It was after there was an earthquake in Los Angeles in
the early 90s?
This was
93 or something?
I'm trying to remember exactly. Sometimes it's hard to remember. That whole thing becomes a big blur. But I remember being in this hotel in Skid Row, and there was an earthquake, and I thought, I'm getting out of here, you know. First of all, we couldn't go back in the hotel. And I went to Greyhound Station, got a bus up to San Francisco. It was 1988, maybe early 89. I'd have to go back in my memory. But anyway, then I get to San Francisco, and I immediately, you know, this is when I thought, okay, I mean, I'd been always trying to stop. I never was able to stop for a day. I might be able to skip the morning drink, but by the afternoon, I'd need one. Mm-hmm. You know, my body needed it, you know, just that physical need. I mean, lots of people listening to this will know exactly what I'm talking about. It's not that.
Yep.
It's not that I had alcoholism. It's that alcoholism had me, you know. I mean, it's like this thing that just got you, you know. I couldn't not drink. I had to have something in my system by this stage. And when I came back up to San Francisco, of course, I thought, well, I'll get away from all this crack cocaine on the street in LA. And, of course, I meet somebody who's a drug dealer right away. And all of a sudden, I'm in this, basically, he became my landlord too. And I was trying to get it together, and I'd gotten some shifts in a restaurant, and of course, drinking every day, cocaine every night, partying around the clock. And that's when I hit my bottom, was there in San Francisco in 1989. And that's when I went to AA.
Amazing. Thank you, Patrick. Now, our question 4 is, at your worst, did you ever want to die? Did you consider suicide? I mean, you know, LA, crack pipes, earthquakes, you can't hold down a job, you wake up with the shakes, you know, you're deciding to move about the place. There were lots of places, I suppose, where you could have just said, you know what, I'm just not up for this sort of thing anymore. I'm just not up for this life. Did you? Did that ever come over you?
Not during that period, interestingly. I had suicidal ideation when I was a 15-year-old. Definitely. There is a part in my story a little later on where there is a suicide attempt, a very serious suicide. It wasn't like I was. it wasn't like a cry for help. It was planned, and I just wanted it to be over. But that's a later part of the story.
Sure, okay. And not one that you experienced as a result of being powerless over alcohol?
Well, there's a point in my story later on. I mean, I don't know if you want to skip to it now, but it was after a long period of sobriety where I hit a wall, and I just hit that point.
If you don't mind talking about it, I think it's important to talk about it because this is where our illness can take us. Sometimes when we're still drinking and using, but also sometimes, famously perhaps, when we stop. So if you're comfortable talking about it, I'd love to hear it.
If you're enjoying this podcast and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe.
Yeah, well, first of all, when I went to AA in 1989 in San Francisco, I just loved AA from the very first meeting. So I'll start with that bit because I'd heard about AA. I kind of knew that it worked through a friend who I'd met in London years prior in the 70s. And I'd seen that guy living under the arches at Waterloo Station. Meth drinker, an Irish fella, Eddie. And I'd seen him get sober in AA. And he was always singing the praises of AA and telling me that I should go to AA with him, And I thought, well, geez, I'm not as bad as you. You're a friggin' meth drinker, man. I have not drank methylated spirits, But I thought, well, maybe if I ever become a Mets drinker, but but I did get to the point where I went to an AA meeting to check it out, and the first meeting I ever went to in San Francisco was kind of a wild ride. The guy next to me was drunk, disturbing the meeting, and throwing rolled up papers at the secretary. And it was just, it kind of, actually they ended it early because it got a bit out of control. And it was my very first AA meeting ever. Maybe a dozen people at it. And then the secretary, lovely fellow, he comes to me afterwards. He said, oh, you said it was your first meeting. I hope this doesn't put you off. And I thought it didn't put me off one little bit, really did.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have been sitting next to that guy at a bar. It was a Saturday night. I mean, shit. And so I kind of was taken by the fact that some woman's hugging this guy outside and he's crying on her shoulder. And she said, oh, keep coming back, honey. It'll be okay. And I thought, there was something sweet about it. I don't know. I felt at home.
This total craziness, that we've all been in those meetings one way or another, where something like that happens and you think, my God, someone's gonna rip that guy's head off, and then before you know it, you go outside and they're all smoking fags and hugging and and laughing.
So there was that kind of attracted me, to be honest with you.
Absolutely, me too.
Program of attraction, not promotion, but that did attract me. I've heard a guy say once in a meeting, it said, if you go to your first AA meeting and everything seems right, when you're ready, no matter what happens in the meeting, it'll be fine. If you're not ready, no matter what happens in the meeting, it'll be wrong. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So kind of like that.
So you did the steps and so on in AA, I take it, and you got sober. Is that what happened next?
Well, yeah. So the secretary came and talked to me. He said, here's a meeting list. There's a good meeting tomorrow night. And it was actually called Friendly Circle. and it's a beginner's meeting. It's still around in San Francisco. It's an old meeting in San Francisco. They have a beginner's meeting followed by a big meeting after it, a sort of 45-minute beginner's meeting, and then the main meeting 15 minutes later, which is a format that I've seen used around the place, which is a good idea, Get the beginners in and then have the main meeting and all people coming in, looking sponsors willing to help out. It was very active kind of group like that. So I go there and I sit in the back row, introduce myself, and then some guys come over to me after the meeting, take me for coffee and one of them tells me he's going to be my sponsor and that let's meet tomorrow night and we'll go to another meeting. And I got a service commitment that first night. They said, well, next week you can be the greeter, show up 15 minutes early and help us set up, and then we go out and greet people outside. And then the next meeting I went to on the Monday night was they needed a coffee maker, and so the guy who said he was my sponsor, who brought me to the meeting, came and brought me to the meeting. We met beforehand and had dinner. And he said, well, Patrick will be the coffee maker. So all of a sudden, my first week, I have 2 service commitments. And I think that's what kept me coming, because I had this thing of, well, if I've said, I got to show up, but I also liked I took to the meetings. And so I was going to a meeting every day. And for the first 7, 8 years, I don't think I missed a day of going to meetings. And I got into the steps pretty quick with somebody who, not the guy who was my sponsor, was actually somebody else who I kind of asked to take me through to do a 4th step with. And because he was explaining how he did the 4th step, I thought, oh, I want to do that. And so we did a 4th and 5th step on a Saturday afternoon. I mean, it can be done really fast. I mean, it's not that it's a one and done situation anyway. It's just that you can learn the process from somebody.
Definitely, yeah.
And then you can do it again and again and again.
And so you got sober then in San Francisco. It's 1989, and you said, just circling back to our question 4, which is, did you ever want to die? Did you consider suicide at your worst? And so this can be, as we were saying, it can be when you're still drinking and using, or when you've been sober for quite some time. What happened then when you said earlier you hit a wall? At some point in your sobriety, you hit a wall.
Yeah, well, when I spent the first year of my sobriety really focused on my sobriety. But then, of course, I got well and I was able to work again. And I'm very good at what I do. It just happened to be gifted in that respect. And so when I got back in the workplace, I was getting a lot of offers. And I was offered a partnership in a company, and I got involved in that. And that really, like I said, the first 8 years at least, I was still very involved in meetings, but my life bit by bit got busy. And the meetings and the AA program became like a tick the box. Well, I got to go to 3 meetings a week, or 4 meetings a week. And every now and then when I go through a bad patch emotionally, I'd go to more meetings, get a couple of sponsees and work with them. That really helped, actually, having guys to work with,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then I basically had a relapse after 24 years, to cut to the chase. And in that 24th year, basically I'd become very successful, and all of that stuff, and successful with material shit and all that, and I had a lovely wife and 2 wonderful children. I got married to a wonderful woman who had two young children. I became their stepdad, and they were a real gift in my life. And but all of the pressures of life just became overwhelming. Like I said, definitely was a workaholic. And I was just doing so many things and had so many commitments. I became completely overwhelmed. I had basically what they call a nervous breakdown or a nervous breakthrough, whatever you want to call it. And I really lost it after 24 years. It was first through, it started with a lot of anxiety and not able to sleep. And it really started with medication. First of all, sleep medication, then anxiety medication, And it's a slippery slope. I mean, certainly there are good medications that there are a lot of people who need them, even in recovery. AA has a wonderful pamphlet all about medication. But I would say that my relapse came through the abuse of medication, you know, and
Let's make this very clear. I've said this a few times on the pod, but I want to repeat it. You know, we take no official position on. We're not doctors. I'm not a doctor. You're not a doctor, and we don't want to discuss other, you know, whether medications should or shouldn't be. This is absolutely up to the interpretation of every single person who is in recovery, to work it the way they see fit. You know, so I think it's really important that we mention this, and generally speaking, follow your doctor's advice, really.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's when it comes up, when people ask about it, I give them the pamphlet. I say, well, AA has a really good pamphlet on it. The pamphlet on the pamphlets are great. Oh, there's so many of them, but the one on medications and other drugs is a very good one, and it's just people sharing their experience. I have shared my experience with it when asked about it, especially when talking about the relapse. I will be honest about what led up to it. You know, they say the relapse ends with the drink. And it did in this case, because I was, if you go to use your healthcare benefits here, Kaiser Permanente or whoever, that's who I was with, and you go to the doctor and you go to the hospital and you say, I'm having anxiety attacks and panic attacks, and I don't know what's going on and I can't sleep. Well, they're going to turn you over to the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist's job is just to dispense medication. It's not like you're going to talk to a psychologist and sit on the couch with Carl, a Jungian therapist. You know, he's just looking at a chart and trying to see what he can give you, you know, and I got into that system, and it's a slippery slope. I was warned about it, and I used to warn people about it too, but you know, when you're in the middle of it and you're having panic attacks and you're going crazy and you can't sleep, well, you know that hungry, angry, lonely, tired, that's suddenly that on steroids, you know what I mean? My thinking wasn't straight. I got caught up in this medication merry-go-round, and then one day I thought, you know, fuck this. I know a medication that works real fucking well. And I drank a bottle of wine and I felt great.
Yep. For how long?
5 years. No, I didn't feel great for 5 years, but I had a 5-year relapse.
Wow. That's a very long relapse.
Well, yeah. Yeah, I can't call that a slip.
Not quite. No. So really what happened is you went back to drinking. I mean, I wouldn't even call it a relapse at this point. You know what I mean?
Essentially, yes. Essentially, yes.
You went back to drinking. Wow. And how did you justify it to yourself at that time?
Oh, I didn't bother.
Oh, wow. Okay. Mm-hmm.
I don't think I was trying to justify it. I just thought, okay, well, this seems to work. And, you know, I had during the relapse, during the period when I was really going through a lot of turmoil, I did, you know, the company I was partner in, they bought me out and didn't really want me around. And that really hurt. That really hurt. Big time. I'd put in so much effort into that, you know. And far too much when I think about it, and given it too much importance in my life. But that really hurt. And so I felt like I was a failure. I felt terrible. And funny, when I started drinking again, I started another business. Again, you know, when I take a drink, you will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle you. I mean, I don't know. This is just my experience, and this is what happened.
Sure. So, but that, you know, those 5 years, they ended with you at some point returning to the rooms, but also with you not wanting to be around any longer.
They ended really badly. Well, they ended in a good way because I ended up back in the rooms.
What did your rock bottom look like then?
Oh man, it was bad. It was like numerous visits to the emergency room. I mean, finally, my dear wife, she couldn't take living with me. She'd met me sober, so thankfully, our children had, our daughter had grown up, and our son was away at college, so they knew what was going on, but I was just somebody who went off drinking on his own. I wasn't going around the house causing it was causing chaos, definitely, because it was especially for my wife, who just marries this sober man, and all of a sudden he's drunk every day, freaked her out. And so she wanted a divorce, which we went through. And that's what took me to Berlin. People say, what's the Berlin part of the story? How do you end up in Berlin? I said, I was drunk at the time, and I was there, and I decided to move there, bought myself a little flat there and all that. But,
So another
geographic. And then I had started this business that was running quite well in San Francisco. And I would go back and forth, And finally, though, it got out of control where I was in Germany. I didn't have health care, and I was really sick. I was very, very ill. I was having constant DTs, really seizures. And I had this, I was in bad shape. And it turns out I thought, I'm coughing up blood. I'm like really in bad shape. So anyway, I decided, I better go back to San Francisco. I went to San Francisco. I knew that if I went to the emergency room at San Francisco General, they would take me in. I'd been there before. And so I go to the emergency room at San Francisco General. They put me right on a gurney. I mean, my knees were all swollen up. I had this rash all over my legs. My liver was all swollen up. I was out of, I didn't look like I look today, but, and then they said, well, first of all, you've got, pretty severe pneumonia. And you got all this other stuff. We have to do some tests. And I was in there on drip feeds and everything else. And then, of course, they ask you, well, what about alcohol? Well, yeah, I've, a few beers every day, But so they had given me then, when I left the hospital after a week or so, they'd given me a medication like what's it called? The one that,
to detox.
Well, that one, but there's the other one that if you drink on it, you're going to throw up. You're going to get,
antabuse.
Yeah, not antabuse, but similar. So the guy said, I said, what'll happen if I drink on that? He said, you get severely ill. So I thought, okay, well, I know how to handle that. I left and I went drinking right away and got severely sick, but I'd been used to that. I thought, get this out of the way so I can start again. And that's really when I know, the physical torment of alcoholism set in, what they call end stage alcoholism, when there's no way I could stop. There was no way I could go through a day without a drink. I mean, no way. Severe.
And this is after you've already had 24 years sobriety.
Yeah, exactly. And knew the big book inside out and all that stuff. You got to be careful about knowledge,
If we return slowly back to the questions, so our question 4 was, did you ever want to die? Did you consider suicide? This is what you meant, this time there where you meant that this is when you wanted to die, you didn't want to be around any longer.
Well, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you for sharing. Question 5 is, What other methods did you try to get sober before finding the rooms? Now, you had ample time twice to try different methods, to stay sober. Did you try anything? Did you try to moderate? Did you, I don't know, try exercise?
Well, when they brought out that triple distilled over charcoal vodka that doesn't give you a hangover, I thought maybe that'll work. And when you read more about alcoholism, taking a drink, not taking a drink, swearing off forever, with or without, all of that, but I couldn't go a day without a drink. There was no way.
There's no point in trying, I suppose, once you're that far advanced. Mm-hmm.
No.
Our question 6 is, did you struggle when you came in with the word God? Now, you're coming from an Irish Catholic background. I come from an Italian Catholic background. I've often said on here that when I came in, I had a Catholic hangover. So there's a lot of the words that rubbed me the wrong way, the spiritual terms, to me, in hindsight, I realized that what rubbed me the wrong way was that I felt that I had to find a Christian God, the one that my mother taught me, if you will, right? So that I would have to find the same thing. And I think that is really what was in the way, and also hence why this question came about. So did you struggle with the word God, or did you take to it?
Oh, I didn't struggle with it at all. I'd hear people talking about it, say, oh, God bless them, they need it, I mean, I had sort of given up on all that when I was probably around 12 years old. And I grew up obviously in a very Catholic home, and I was an altar boy. I remember I used to go to Mass every morning because my grandmother would go. I'd go with her as a kid, and then of course I was an altar boy. And if you grow up in that part of Ireland, that's what you do. And especially that era, not anymore. It's it's very different in Ireland today, but definitely that era. And I was, but I had started. I think when I realized they had lied to me about Santa Claus, I started to rethink everything.
You never got over that? No, fair enough.
So no, I mean, I'd heard people. I grew up in a God-fearing country or whatever, but I had gotten away from it at a young age, especially after I left home. But I was always interested in spiritual literature and stuff, and Buddhism, things like that. I'd started as a teenager, and starting with Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, and then, what was it, Christmas Humphreys' book on Zen or whatever. But so stuff like that was always interesting to me, spiritual literature and such. And, but no, I mean, I would hear people talk about, honestly, in the rooms in San Francisco, it's a very diverse sort of mix. So you wouldn't, if I'd gotten sober in the Bible Belt, it would have been, it's very different in different parts of the world, But I didn't have a struggle per se with it.
It's also very different, I think, from alcoholic to alcoholic. It's definitely depends on where you are and so on. But I also think it's a really personal thing, just like we need to find a power greater than ourselves that is personal to us.
Yeah.
And of course, your struggles with that concept are going to get exposed and hopefully discarded in the process, when you get sober, right? In your steps 2, 3 and onwards. Thank you, Patrick. So our question 7 is, how do you experience your higher power today?
Oh, that's a good one. I would say in very ordinary moments, when the ordinary becomes the extraordinary. I was out for a walk this morning, and I just loved looking at the trees, I was just enjoying the air, the trees. If I can be in the moment and love that moment and enjoy that moment. I spend a lot of time in nature. I have a van. I travel a lot all around the Western United States at the moment where I am. And I love, actually, I have no problem being alone. So I've got Zoom, so I can suddenly just jump and be with 100 people, and then I can go back to looking for eagles or, I like to go out in nature a lot. And So yeah, so that to me is the more I can endeavor to be in the moment and present. That is a good experience of that. And through other people, sometimes there's some people I really enjoy their company, and like I look at them and think, wow, this guy's such a character, and so interesting and fun. And yeah, and enjoy being around them, you know what I mean? So that's just feeling comfortable in my own skin and the universe and around people, places, and things, right? I mean, where we struggled with people, places, and things for so long to suddenly feel at home in the world. I mean, hey, I'll take that for $1.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's really well said there. Thank you. Question 8. Which parts of the steps were the most difficult for you? Now, I'm assuming you've done the steps a few times.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't consider it done the steps because I think that for me, it seems like it's a living process, right? But I would say so the difficulty for me, obviously, you may well imagine, would be turning my will and my life over to the care of anything, because I was just such a self-willed person, which is nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's just that when it runs riot and rules my life and causes me all sorts of anxiety because I'm trying to run the show and everybody else's life at the same time, then it becomes a problem. Obviously, it became a problem for me in sobriety, which led to a relapse. And when I look at it...
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted. It's interesting, isn't it, that from an outside point of view, I suppose, people would look at you and go, this guy is admirable, but he's a doer, someone who takes matters in their own hands, makes something of themselves, and so on and so forth. So that's an admirable quality. But somehow we then cross from there into a territory where we start playing God, really.
Yeah.
And we try to, as you just said, run the show. And it's a fine line, I suppose, between being a doer and taking matters in your own hands and making something and enacting change on the one hand, and on the other hand, just absolute crazy, headless self-seeking, which is the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, that's, if you want to know what I struggled with, it was that. I mean, step 3, step 7, step 6 and 7, and so on, just letting go, letting God, or letting higher power, greater power, whatever you want to call it. But so tapping into that unlimited source, that's within us. But tapping into it in a way that you don't become, what was it, Icarus, flies so high with his wings put together with the wax or whatever, and it comes crashing down because he thinks he can fly so high, gets too close to the sun. Yeah, I mean, so I can see that parallels in my own life where I just thought that I was the power. That's an interesting thing, like you're saying. I mean, we live in a society that promotes, self-will. And I'm this guy who reads these kind of books and,
This is so interesting because I've read a lot of self-help books as well, specifically in the time. So I did a lot of drinking and using in my 20s, and then I somehow moderated or certainly stopped the drugs, and I was rampant in all sorts of other areas, work, eating, and so on, but I kept it together, and then I started using again, and then I came into the rooms. In that time, though, in those 17 years of untreated alcoholism, right, I read a whole lot of self-help books. And in those books, often, and there's some really good ones and some less good ones, of course, and I don't want to, absolutely, I don't want to trash the whole concept at all. But, of course, a lot of them, and half of YouTube basically tells you can do stuff by yourself. You can change things around. You can be the master of your life, and so on and so forth. And I think we take that quite a bit too literally, as alcoholics and addicts. And then we start believing our hype, and before you know it, it is like the sun is orbiting the Earth again rather than the other way around. We start thinking that we run the universe.
Well, yeah, and maybe the only thing that'll change that is a relapse. In my case, I'm speaking for myself. Maybe the only thing that changed that was what happened. And then all of a sudden, it's not an intellectual exercise trying to figure it out. It's, wow, it's an experience that I can really see and feel. Because I did change when I came back. And sometimes the change, it's like they talk about being it's in the book where sort of between 9 and 10, where they talk about being in a position of neutrality, and it says something to the effect, I can't remember the exact words. I think it's that he says we get there without any thought or effort on our own part. See, I thought it was all about thought and effort. I thought it was my effort that's going to get me there. Well, my effort doesn't, I'm not the dispenser of grace, you know what I mean?
No, not quite. Yeah.
They say they're for the grace of God go I. They say stuff like that. And surely, I thought, well, if I do this step perfectly, I see people now who have all sorts of ways of doing steps with apps and, Excel spreadsheets, and that it seems to me is about management. It's a management exercise. Maybe what about unmanageability? Oh, there's all sorts of conundrums and paradox and God knows what about living this life, right? But they're the great teachers. The great teacher is alcohol itself, in my case.
Now, I suppose this is the first time I'll do this, but I suppose I can answer at least in part your question 9, which is which character defects give you most trouble, and that would probably be self-seeking to start with.
Well, yeah. I mean, first of all, I'm not into the character defect idea. Never was, actually. It just seems like saying the word defective over and over is not helpful. For me, that's just my perspective on it. Character default is a better word because that's what it is. I default to that setting. I make up my own setting. I decide what the setting's going to be and I default to it, right? I don't see that as, I think we overfocus on defects and all that stuff and beat ourselves over the head with this program. The program's all about love, man. And we got to start with ourselves, a bit of self-compassion instead of, anyway, that's just my, I'm going to get off my soapbox now. But that's just my take on that. I think, just coming from it in a way of understanding myself and copping to the fact that it doesn't really work very well is a good idea, rather than say, oh, I'm defective and only God can change it and please help. Yeah. I mean, look, I'm not trying to, whatever way people see it is up to them. That's just how I see it. I just,
Sure.
I just don't focus on, I just try to analyze it and see what's going on. And I mean, look, what happened to me, it's obvious that it didn't work. Whatever I was doing didn't, it's like they say, well, how's that working for you?
Yeah. Well.
Obviously it didn't work very well, Patrick. So now, but I had to learn from getting beat,
Absolutely. I heard about the character default rather than defect from at your conference, or the conference you organised in London. Yeah, with Dr. Alan Berger, who was speaking about this, and it rang. I found it rang quite true for me because I'm. Character defect sounds, he said it sounds blamey and shamey, and I sort of tend to agree with that, but it's personal to everybody, and everybody needs to interpret the book and the steps in their own way. They are broad enough for everybody to fit under that umbrella, right? And if you'd rather call it default than defect, then I think that that's a really valid thing to do, but for myself, obviously, I do need to look after those things that I do that are unhelpful behaviors for me, whether I call them one way or another, and that's my step 6 and 7. But I think that it's not a bad call at all to give it a different name if that makes you feel better. I mean, interestingly, and certainly also not a call for us to feel bad about ourselves or hit ourselves over the head again, because then we're just back in alcoholism, really, right? If I'm so defective, this is terrible. It's just the other end of the stick.
Yeah, we might be taking ourselves too seriously.
Interesting, but to each their own, of course, and whatever works for you is good for us. Our question 10: what is the best thing recovery has given you?
Sitting here with you right now. I mean, I'm not looking for some big prize or something that has given me. I would say just every day, just feeling comfortable in my own skin, and feeling comfortable around people, places, and things. I mean, just being, what is recovery? It's just living life on life's terms and being able to sort of, understanding how to deal with difficulties that come up. I mean, there are so many things I could point to here, but I would say, it's changed over time too. If you'd asked me that question after I was 2 years sober, I would have probably pointed to a lot of material stuff and job and this and that, which is fine. We change. We go through different periods of our lives. I mean, I'm 67 now. I'm not, 27 or 37. So, your attitude and outlook upon life changes, I guess. They say.
Yeah, no, it does. Of course it does. I'm sorry. And of course, if you have long-term sobriety, no long-term sobriety, then those things will change with that.
Yeah, I think so. But feeling comfortable in my own skin, probably.
Which, given where we come from, is not little and not to be underestimated.
It's a big deal. Yeah, that's a big deal.
Question 11. What would you say to a newcomer or someone wondering if they're an addict?
Usually I give them the 20 questions. And again, I go back to the pamphlets and AA speaking for itself. I can't tell them, you're definitely an alcoholic. What do I know? I mean, there's the 20 questions are a pretty good pointer. And they have the pamphlet for newcomers. The newcomer asks. That's a good one. And then maybe have a cup of coffee with them and have a conversation, listen to their point of view. You know what I mean? And, but it's up to them to decide. We self-describe,
Definitely.
I don't go say, okay, I'm going to go to tomorrow night's meeting and I say, Joe, here's an alcoholic, I mean, everybody's got to make their own mind up, man. Otherwise alcohol will tell them at some point. And I don't like to say, if you think you can go out and drink like a gentleman, my hat is off to you. I don't like that because I know that when you go out today onto the street where I was when in 1988, if I'm on the street today, with fentanyl out there, I'm probably going to end up dead. So I would hate to see people, we all would love to see people come back, but they don't all do, they just don't.
So our last question, the last of the 12 questions I ask every guest on this podcast is, what do you want your higher power to say to you at the pearly gates, quote unquote?
Oh, well, St. Peter is not my higher power.
Yeah, that's a fair comment.
He's got the keys. I mean, you got to remember, I grew up I know who's in charge up there.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I had this conversation with my granny probably when I was 10 years old about how do you deal with St. Peter at the gate, because he's the key man. Yeah, so St. Peter's the one at the pearly gates, and as the story goes, and you do have an option. You can negotiate. I figured this out when I was about 10. Like I said, you can go to. There's purgatory. You know about purgatory, right? It's where the word purge comes from, So you can go there and you can purge and it's your soul that's at the gate. It's not your body anyway. This is a long-winded answer. I've been trying to get out of the question, because I don't know about. Maybe if there are gates, man, I'll be shocked.
All right, give us your negotiation tactic then. Go on.
Well, I'd be talking to myself because the heart. I mean, my understanding of the power is something deep down within. That's the understanding also from the book. But I mean, look, if I get to that point and I'm still sober and living the sober life, then hopefully all will be good in the here and hereafter. I do sort of, I learned from the two-way prayer people and all of that, how to ask for guidance and listen for the answer. I don't really hear a voice or anything, but I do find it helpful to put out what I'm going through and wait for some kind of response that comes, as sort of an intuition. But I don't know if this answers your question. But yeah, I'm not sure.
It's a valid answer. You're not sure. It's a really valid answer, especially with a question that is open to all kinds of interpretations, like this one. So no, that is a valid answer. Patrick, it's been really, really great. You've taken me and our listeners, you've taken us through sort of quite a rock and roll tour, different countries and conditions and, up and down the ladder and, round and round the globe. It's been really cool, man. Thank you so much for being my guest on 12 Steps and 12 Questions.
Well, it's good to be still here after all that. You know what I mean? So I'm just very grateful for that. I mean, what are the chances? It's unfortunate that this disease takes so many of us, and I've seen lost friends in the program over the years. I've seen people die of this disease. It's really, I'm very, very grateful to still be here and be able to enjoy our conversation. So thank you, Silvio.
We've come to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe. While this pod is based on the 12-step recovery program, it's not officially affiliated with any 12-step fellowship. 12 Steps and 12 Questions is not substance or behavior specific. It's fully self-supporting and not for profit. And this next bit. It's not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, and it neither endorses nor opposes any causes.